What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video on What If Deku Was the Avatar Part 15, the last part. Now, before we jump into this, I'm gonna go real quickly shout out the people on the Discord. Thank you, Nightspeed, David222, God Dino, Gazing the Moon of the North, Mr. Death, Imagination, BB Pipe, Monster, The Raven Grim, Sands, Dervis, Greasy Leg. Thank you all for joining the Discord, and if y'all want to join the Discord, go down in the description down below and join it. As you know, there's tons of people there that will be kind and nice if you just want to message and play around. Now, let's jump straight into this what if. Where he last left off, Izuku was training with the rest of the people at the training camp. He had gotten the ability to leave early after talking to Aizawa-sensei to allow him to leave to take on his final airbending trial. He quickly opened up a small portal to the spirit realm and hopped through it. Bandit was on his shoulder as well, as his air bison was waiting on the other side for him. Deku usually kept his air bison in the spirit world, mainly to not upset the general populace about a new flying creature flying around. Izuku hopped through and decided to start flying his way back towards the air temple. Eventually, Deku arrived and Tenzin greeted him. "Hello, Izuku. I'm guessing you're here to finish your final trial?" "Yep. So, what is it gonna be?" "Well, Izuku, it's gonna be your final trial." "Yes, but what is the final trial?" "It's just the final trial. Don't worry about it." Izuku didn't understand what Tenzin was getting at, but really didn't care at this point. Eventually, Tenzin led him to this area where all around him there was 3 different airbenders. Each airbender seemed to be really proficient in the craft. Tenzin then explained, "You have to dodge every single attack from all of these airbenders for an upwards of 5 minutes. If you can do this, then you master the final trial. Technically, you're already counted as a master airbender by most of the personnel by airbender conduct, because you developed a new airbending art. But I know you said you want to take the final trial, which would be this: having to learn how to keep yourself at distance. We airbenders do tend to pride ourselves on being a very peaceful group. We do not like to fight. So, if you can master this technique, then you should be able to fare yourself pretty well in any fights or encounterments." Izuku thanked Tenzin for the opportunity and prepared his stance as he prepared to fight the 3 airbenders in front of him. 2 of the airbenders were, well, all 3 of them were people he realized, with it being Janora, Crystal, and Alex. All 3 of them smiled towards Deku, and Deku just kind of sighed looking at all 3 of them. He wanted to test out a new thing, something that he hadn't really tested yet, mainly just because the situation never called for it. He was never in a need to use this skill, so he was wondering how it would go if he used the skill now. Izuku prepared himself in a fighting stance as everyone else slowly started to charge at him. Izuku then activated it. He had already used the basic principle of this skill, which was to push everyone back using compressed air bending. But manipulating compressed air bending and then forcing himself upwards should allow him to create an upwards draft, giving him the capabilities to, well, essentially fly. Izuku starts off by pulling the thing very close to him, which confused everyone there. It was super duper close. Almost like it wasn't even meant to affect them, and then they started to see what Izuku was going to do. Izuku then slowly started to manipulate the crest air around him and create a pillar, and started to use the pillar to push himself upwards. Eventually, he got so far off the ground to where he was practically untouchable by anyone else that was present. This kind of upset the 3 people that were there, because they were like, well, how are we meant to go against Izuku now? He's actually, at essence, flying. Izuku realized that his technique was kinda slightly cheap and decided to deactivate it for now. He then got into a fighting stance again after landing back down on the ground. This made a lot of the other people more happy because Izuku wasn't just going to keep up his flying shtick the entire game. He was actually going to try to participate in the competition itself. Eventually, Izuku got back down to the ground and looked at each of them. Each one of them looking very discomfortedly at Izuku. They all know Izuku was, well, a better airbender than any of them were combined. His pioneering in the art of airbending was impressive, more impressive than anything else. Izuku prepared himself as they all prepared to start attacking him. Jinora came from the left when Alex came from the right. They both used compressed air blades to try to catch Izuku off balance. Almost all the more adept airbenders were practicing Izuku's bending techniques, so it kind of caught Izuku not off guard that they were able to attack him the way that they did. Eventually, while Izuku was defending against that, Crystal came out of nowhere and did a downward swipe towards Izuku. Izuku thankfully was able to quickly dodge the attack. He then ended up using a technique that one of his past lives taught him, which was the air scooter, and scooted away. Jinora found this to be pretty aggravating for simple reasons and decided to try to attack Izuku again. Izuku dodged the attacks as if they were effortless, like they were nothing to him, which annoyed Jinora even more. She thought she was pretty proficient in Izuku's bending arts, but as Izuku was teaching her, he was more efficient than her or anyone else, which kind of upset Jinora, mainly just because she was known as to being an epic pioneer, just like her grandfather was. But the Avatar himself, obviously being another pioneer of the same bending type. Avatars tend to be the best benders in every single element, or at least if they train diligently enough. Eventually, Izuku ran out the timer for all the 5 minutes, which greatly upset most of the other personnel that were there, mainly because they all figured they had a pretty winning good chance on beating Izuku. But as Izuku had just shown, their winning chance was nothing more than a feeble myth they used to rely on, which, kind of upsetted everyone else, but there wasn't much that they could do. So eventually, Izuku ended up patting them all on the back, stating that their abilities weren't bad. They were actually couldn't be that much worse than his. The main difference was that Izuku was more intelligent in his skill usage. He then explained that all of them ended up basically becoming no more than just, I want to do this, I want to do that. While Izuku then explained that his abilities and skills that he used tend to be way different, way more stable. There is almost no issue with Izuku's skills compared to anyone else's skills, and yet for some reason, Izuku was able to beat almost anyone else, like it was nothing. This confused them all, and Izuku then explained, see, your air compression bending, and sound bending both aren't really an issue. Now, see, the issue here with your two skills is that you don't really, know the science behind it. Well, anyway, it doesn't change the fact that you guys lost. Both of them kind of look satire towards Izuku's statement, understanding that they did kind of lose, but didn't want to accurately admit it themselves. Eventually, Izuku ended up grabbing his stuff and just decided to chill. Sooner or later, Korra came back and actually started to talk to him. Izuku then said towards Korra that he had a crazy idea. What's this idea, Ain? I mean, not Ain. What's this idea, Izuku? Well, you see, I learned energy bending. I ended up picking it up after the fight. But now that I know it, I realize that I can give bending to different personnel. Okay. There are people in my world that don't have any skills, that are quirkless like me, and that can't do anything. Oh. So you want to give them bending, but that'll upset the balance. Izuku shook his head no, and then stated that the balance won't be upsetted. What do you mean? Izuku then explained that 20% of the population are quirkless. So, if you do 20 divided by 4, 5% of the population would all get a specific bending type. 5% being water bending, 5% being earth bending, 5% being fire bending, and 5% being air bending. Korra then realized that, yes, it would keep the balance, but then she asked, what about the balance of other personnel? Like, you said your world's filled with superpowers, right? What about all those people with superpowers that aren't bending? Won't it mess up that balance? Izuku then shook his head no again, stating that eventually quirkless personnel will be wiped out. This just makes us have a better chance. Not to mention, bending's not counted as quirks, it's two different things. Think of it as like an upgrade on top of an upgrade. It's not upsetting balance as much as it's just rectifying the already upset balance as it is. But there's people without bending in this world. Yes, but almost all those personnel have now become airbenders. They're no longer without a bending element because their bending element is airbending now. Just like how in my world, people with quirks will no longer have without quirks, they will actually have their quirk element or bending, you know? Eventually, Korra realized that Izuku really just meant what he meant, almost like nothing was the issue. Eventually, Izuku came back to his world and explained his new mission to his mentors. His mentors eventually understood what he was getting at and let him go. They didn't really understand how he had the capability to do it, but they know that he had the capability of doing it no matter what. Now, after Izuku had left, he had found a quirkless kid and had gifted the kid the bending ability of air. He told the kid that airbending relied on his spirituality, and that the kid needed to hone his spirituality if he wanted to master airbending. The kid was confused until he started to bend the air around him, understanding that his abilities were just as this strange man had said. Eventually, Izuku went around talking to more and more personnel and giving, more personnel quirks. It started to become a point where Izuku could give anyone a quirk. This caught the attention of one man, a man that was very well confused of this quirk-giving ability that Izuku had. Most of the other personnel that were scientists or anything were really kind of confused by Izuku's quirk, because it's the ability to give other people quirks, even though that's not the quirk ability as we all know it. Eventually, people start to understand that these personnel that are sought by this kid gain the ability to manipulate 1 out of 4 elements, with the elements being water, fire, wind, and air. This kind of confused Izuku a lot. This confused people a lot because they wondered what allowed Izuku to have the very specific quirk bending that he had. Eventually, Izuku made a public announcement, explaining that his goal was to make sure no one was ever quirkless again. He'll be giving everyone a quirk that defines under one of the 4 different types: fire, earth, wind, and water. Fire, earth, air, and water. This confused all the people again. They want to know how Izuku was doing it, but Izuku didn't seem to want to tell them. Eventually, Izuku then ended up explaining that his capabilities allowed him to do it. One man in the background eventually disliked this statement, thinking that he was a very unique case scenario with his quirk, but just to hear that another boy had the same capabilities as him. The man almost laughed at his impudence that he had represented and shown. Eventually, the man decided to sought after the kid to keep his abilities in check. Deku was walking around and eventually saw a man. The man looked quite old and had a mask on his face. Izuku walked up to the man asking if the man was okay. Izuku could heal people with waterbending, even though he wasn't the most proficient in it. It was still one of the bending elements that he had. Eventually, the man took notice of who Izuku was, and he said, "Oh, you're the Avatar, right? That's your hero name? The one going around everywhere and giving everyone quirks?" Izuku said, "Oh, yes, that's me. Even though I don't give him quirks, I've explained this enough times, I give him bending." Yes. Whatever this bending thing is. "Well, don't worry about me, I'm an old man," as All For One puts his hand on Izuku's shoulder. Izuku can instantaneously tell that something's off about the man, but keeps talking with him to try to cover up his suspicions about the man himself. All For One, on the other hand, was kind of confused about why he wasn't gaining Izuku's quirk. It was almost like something was stopping him. Almost like there wasn't a quirk there to begin with. Eventually, Izuku said, "So, old man, what happens you to be here?" "Well, you see, young sir, I was actually looking for something. My quirk is a very unique quirk. Generally thought to be the only one of its kind." "Oh, really?" "Yes, the quirk itself is very unique in its base capabilities. But eventually I saw someone on the news who seemed to have a similar quirk to mine." "Oh, and who's that?" "You, my boy." "Huh?" Izuku looked very confused as All For One slowly started to state, "Hello, I am All For One, lead villain of the Villain League. The personnel that attacked the MHA. If I remember correctly, you were a student at that school during the time period. I don't know. Our mole hasn't gone back to us in God knows how long. Really, they should just do their jobs like good personnel." Izuku was very confused about what All For One was saying. Eventually, All For One went on to say, "And I just tried to steal your quirk. Now, kid, you got two options. You either die here, or I can allow you to join me. And you will become a villain of unpermassed experience. Your ability just alone to give people, what you call it, bending, is amazing. And if you can give it out to multiple people, like you have currently, that's just amazing itself in its own right. Now, I'm not forcing you to join me by any means. I'm just saying, your capabilities are way better than being a hero. If you chose to be a villain, you could rule the world, literally and metaphorically. So, what do you say, young Avatar? Do you choose to join with me and rule the world?" Izuku looked towards the man, as he had just said this so plain and clear, almost like he didn't care about what he said. Izuku shook his head no and said, "No," which really shocked All For One. Even though most people didn't know who they were, hearing that he had a similar quirk to Izuku's, All For One totally figured Izuku would bite the bullet. Eventually, Izuku shook his head and said, obviously you don't understand why I'm giving people quirks. I'm giving people quirks so they can become better. So they can be better. That's a shame, All For One says. Izuku said, yes, sadly I'm gonna have to take you into custody, because you just openly admitted that you were a villain. Ho 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 ho. You think you can stop me? Yes. Well, then, I'd love to see you try. Okay. Izuku was kind of confused about what All For One started to say. And then eventually, All For One ended up attacking Izuku using some sort of weird button. Not button. Some sort of weird arm cannon thing, which seemed to basically immobilize Izuku, sending him flying backwards. Izuku realized that it was very similar to his base concept of compressed airbending, which very confused Izuku even more. Eventually, he tried to attack him again and again. Eventually, All For One kept attacking him stronger and faster and faster and stronger. Izuku was barely able to hold him off at the start, but slowly he started to realize all the quirks that All For One had. Izuku then started to use airbending to manipulate the abilities of All For One, its quirks, and then started to use water bending, well, to be more accurate, blood bending, as a way to basically deflect Izuku's base abilities. Eventually, Izuku was able to fight against All For One on a pretty even scale, slowly starting to overpower the mastermind, as he called himself, the leader of all personnel. Eventually, after Izuku was able to beat All For One, it was a long fight, with All For One constantly exploding, using multiple different quirks at once. Eventually, it got bad enough to where Nomus were summoned, and started to attack Izuku with Nomus as well. Luckily, Izuku was able to use blood bending to take out most of the Nomus. As All For One slowly started to drop in front of Izuku, Izuku then stood in front of All For One. He knew what had to be done. This man was too dangerous to allow to live. Izuku then started to circle water around All For One. This time, the water slowly started to turn purple, and All For One's body slowly started to become coated in a purple light. Izuku looked All For One straight in the eyes as All For One smiled, and he's like, so what's this attack? Izuku explained that, see, there are souls in this world. To be more accurate, spirits. Spirits themselves really don't do much on their own, but when influenced by outside sources, can do horrible things. So, now it's just time for you to see what would happen when a spirit gets corrupted. Huh? So what? The Avatar, hero of all good and righteousness, is gonna corrupt my spirit? Yes. I'm gonna corrupt it to make sure you can never do anything bad again. Don't worry though. After this is done, you won't feel any pain, or at least not a lot. You'll never have to experience anything else. You can just easily relax without a care in the world. Izuku looked All For One straight in the face as he slowly started to destroy All For One's soul. All For One smiled, realizing about what he had created. He realized that his capabilities of Izuku were way undermatched. Izuku could be more accurately to state toying with All For One, rather than it being the other way around, All For One toying with Izuku. All for One shook his head, and then looked up at the young boy that was standing in front of him, and said, "You know, Izuku, you're a smart kid. I believe you'll make a great villain in these days." He smiles as the rest of his soul gets destroyed. Izuku looked back where All for One's body laid. He asked the man to rest in peace, even though he knew there was no resting in peace for anyone who had a lost and destroyed soul. Izuku then went on throughout the rest of his years until he turned about 30, giving everyone he knew bending. He also opened up multiple different schools and taught personnel bending arts, so they can end up teaching more people and passing on the knowledge to teach everyone that has bending how to use their capabilities to keep it safe for everyone else. Eventually, Izuku found himself back into his house. He said hi to his mom, who had sadly passed away during his adventures. Eventually, after Izuku gave his respects to his mother, he sat down in his bed that he once laid down on long ago, about 15 years ago, remembering everything that happened. He smiled, realizing how insane everything sounded now. Kind of funny how everything sounded. He had become the Avatar, saved people, ended up helping out a lot. Still, kind of shocked him to this day, as Izuku then drifted asleep. And that's where we're going to leave this one off, guys. I'm thinking about, doing other what ifs as well. And for people who are like kind of confused about the Arnos one, don't worry, guys. The story is gonna get better. Trust me, by part 3, you guys are gonna have your minds blown and you guys are gonna be very confused, and I'll explain it the best I can. So if you guys like this video, hit the like button, and if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button, and until next time, goodbye.